The snow came down like a wall that night, thick and relentless, swallowing the road, the trees, and the silence between heartbeats. Headlights cut through the storm like desperate prayers, and 15 motorcycles crawled along a mountain highway that no longer looked like a road at all. Engines coughed, tires slipped, and fear sat heavy in the frozen air. For those riders, this was not adventure anymore. This was survival. And none of them knew that by the end of the night, a fragile old house glowing with a single porch light would change all of their lives forever. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of doing good even when you have almost nothing, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. The house belonged to Margaret Hale, a 78-year-old widow who had lived alone on that mountain road for nearly 4 decades. The world had grown smaller for her over the years. Her husband had passed long ago, her children had moved to distant cities, and her days followed a quiet rhythm of prayer, tea, and tending the small garden that survived only in summer. Winters were the hardest. Snow trapped her indoors for weeks sometimes, and the wind howled through the trees like it was searching for something it had lost. That night, Margaret had just finished lighting a candle for warmth when she noticed shapes moving beyond her frosted window, shadows flickering through the storm. At first, she thought her eyes were failing her again. But then she heard it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of engines struggling, of men fighting not against the road but against the cold itself. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her thin shoulders and moved slowly to the door. Every instinct born of age told her this was dangerous. 15 bikers, soaked, frozen, strangers in leather and steel, stranded outside her home in the middle of a snowstorm. Fear pressed against her chest, but another feeling rose stronger, older, and deeper. It was the memory of being helped once, long ago, when she had been young and scared and alone. Margaret opened the door. The sight before her was overwhelming. The men were exhausted, their faces red and cracked from the cold, their movements stiff and unsteady. Snow clung to their jackets and helmets like a second skin. They were not threatening in that moment. They were vulnerable, human, and clearly running out of time. The nearest town was miles away, and the storm showed no sign of mercy. Margaret knew her house was small. She knew her supplies were limited. She knew she could barely keep herself warm some nights. Still, she stepped aside and let them in. The house filled quickly with steam and shivers and the heavy smell of wet leather. Margaret moved slowly but with purpose. She set every kettle she owned on the stove, pulled out blankets she had saved for emergencies, and made space where there had been none. Chairs, floors, hallways, even the narrow kitchen became places of refuge. She gave up her own bed without a thought, settling herself into a chair near the fire. Her hands shook as she worked, but her eyes were steady. She did not ask where they were from or why they rode in such weather. She only saw people who needed shelter. The night stretched long and unforgiving outside, but inside that house something changed. The storm raged against the walls, yet warmth slowly took hold. The bikers, hardened by years on the road, softened in the quiet glow of that fragile home. Some dozed sitting upright, others stared into the fire as if remembering something they had forgotten. Margaret moved among them like a gentle shadow, offering soup made from the last of her stores, refilling cups, checking on each man as if he were her own son. As hours passed, the storm reached its peak. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely. Darkness filled the house, broken only by candles in the fire. The cold pressed closer, but no one complained. In that darkness, Margaret felt the familiar ache of loneliness loosen its grip. She was not alone tonight. And though she would never say it aloud, the fear that had followed her since her husband's death eased, replaced by something dangerously close to peace. By morning, the storm had spent itself. Snow lay thick and untouched, the world transformed into a white silence so complete it felt holy. Margaret woke stiff and sore in her chair, her candle burned low. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw them, sprawled across her home, alive, breathing, safe. Relief washed over her like warmth. She rose slowly and moved to the window, intending only to check the weather. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs, lined up outside her small house, stretching down the road and disappearing into the trees, were not 15 motorcycles, but 100. Gleaming chrome and polished steel reflected the pale morning light. Helmets rested carefully on seats. Engines were silent, but the presence was overwhelming. The riders from the night before were already outside, standing in the snow, joined by dozens more who had arrived before dawn. Word had traveled fast. Those 15 bikers had managed to send out a call during the storm, not for rescue, but to tell others what had happened. They spoke of an old woman who opened her door when she had no reason to, of warmth given freely, of kindness that expected nothing in return. Riders from neighboring towns, chapters, and even states had answered. They came not as a gang, not as a threat, but as gratitude given form. Margaret stood frozen at the window, tears blurring her vision. She felt small in that moment, smaller than she had ever felt, yet somehow more important than she had in years. She had done what anyone should do, she told herself. She had done nothing special. But the sight outside argued otherwise. The bikers gathered respectfully, removing helmets, heads bowed. Some carried boxes, others held tools. A few simply stood in silence, hands clasped. They did not crowd her door, they waited. When Margaret finally stepped outside, wrapped in her old coat, the cold bit at her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. She saw faces filled with emotion she rarely saw anymore. Gratitude, respect, something close to reverence. One by one they stepped forward, explaining not with words but with actions. They shoveled her driveway and roof, clearing snow that would have taken her weeks to manage. They fixed the broken fence she had ignored for years. They repaired her sagging porch steps, her leaking roof, and the drafty windows that let winter steal her warmth. Someone quietly arranged deliveries of firewood, food, and medicine that would last her through the harshest months. By noon, her home was no longer fragile. It was strong. The bikers did not stay long after the work was done. They lined up their motorcycles again, engines rumbling softly, respectful of the peace. Before they left, they placed a small plaque near her door, simple and unassuming, thanking her for shelter given without judgment on a night when lives might have been lost. Margaret touched it with trembling fingers, unable to speak. As the last bike disappeared down the road, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was not lonely, it was full. Near the end of our story, if this moment, this kindness, this reminder of humanity has touched your heart even a little, please take a second to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive and reaching people who need hope. Margaret returned inside her home, now warmer than it had been in years. She brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the snow melt under a pale sun. She thought of how close she had come to keeping that door closed, of how fear nearly won, and she understood something profound. Kindness does not require strength, wealth, or safety. It only requires a choice. Before this story ends, I have one special request. Please comment below and tell us whether you believe a single act of kindness can truly change lives. That spring, when the snow finally retreated, Margaret found herself less alone. Letters arrived, visitors stopped by. Not bikers in formation, but individuals checking in, making sure she was well. Her world grew larger again, not because she had traveled, but because compassion had come to her door on a night when the storm was at its worst. And though she would never seek recognition, her small act of humanity echoed far beyond that mountain road, reminding everyone who heard it that even in the coldest moments, warmth is a choice we can always make.